This is the Newsload.
Social media is changing our society. What do you feel that it's doing for comedy?
It's changed everything in every way possible. Well, it's a fantastic way of marketing yourself without having to spend an awful lot of money on radio and television.
You betcha.
You talked earlier, you said word of mouth. Social media is just an amplified version of word of mouth.
It's literally like a town crier for you.
Yeah, it's the town square.
Yeah.
So you can do that, and that really helps a lot of people find an audience faster than they would do it in ones and twos simply by going on stage, having 6 people thinking you're the greatest in the world, and then another 6 people a week after that. This really accelerates the process. The other thing that social media does, the other kind of social media, is that it allows you to do your act on TikTok, YouTube, and get an audience and get excitement without having to have a television series that you get. And it's so hard to get a television series or to get even a radio series or anything like that.
As you well know on the Joan Rivers show and everything.
I well know. It's very, very hard to have that happen. But if you can put your stuff up on YouTube and you hit a nerve, chances are it'll go viral. This is what happened to Russell Peters. Russell Peters was funny before he was famous. Russell Peters was funny, unfortunately, for only hundreds of people, or maybe low thousands of people. But then he was one of the first people to realize how to exploit his act on YouTube, and then hundreds of thousands, millions of people, it went, as they call it, viral, saw it and loved it, fell in love with him, and all of a sudden his visibility went from minor to major. And this is also true with Dane Cook, and a lot of other people now have done this. There was a guy who just did 2 nights at the Sony Center, or whatever they call it now. I still call it the O'Keefe Center, the Meridian Hall.
The Sky Dome?
No, the one down on Front Street. His name is Nate Bargatze.
Okay.
But no one knows. Nate Bargatze has never done a TV series. He's never done a sitcom. He's never had a game show. Yeah. And yet he's out of Los Angeles. He sold 5,600 seats. Now, how did Nate Bargatze sell 5,600 seats?
YouTube.
Through YouTube.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's great because it's democratized the whole process. It doesn't mean everybody's going to be able to do it, but if you do it and you have some luck is involved, and you have to be on point about what people are looking for, you don't have to wait for what's called a gatekeeper to say, yes, you can do the Tonight Show, because maybe they don't find you funny, or maybe there's no room on the Tonight Show.
They're pretty busy.
Because they're pretty busy, because there's lots of people who are qualified to do the Tonight Show. They say that people get their information now as much out of late daily shows as they do out of the newspaper or out of actual news programs.
Their influencer is telling them their thoughts now.
Right. But I'm not so sure that that's entirely true. I used to think it was true, but now I'm not so sure it's true. I think that comics are amazing, and that comics will have you believe what they believe while you're watching them. You're on their wavelength. They're hypnotizing you. They're hypnotizing you to their point of view. If they're liberals, you're a liberal while you're watching them. If you're a conservative, you're a conservative while you're watching them. And then they go off and you turn the TV off.
Because people like Joe Rogan are so controversial, and
so controversial. But if you didn't agree with Joe Rogan in the first place, you wouldn't be watching him. If you didn't agree with Samantha Bee in the first place, you wouldn't be watching her. So I don't think, ultimately, that comics are as influential as they like to think they are. And I'll tell you this story, because I think this story kind of sums it up. There's a friend of mine who's a comic, and he's a woke comic. And everything about his act is woke. And he sees his act not just as making people laugh, but as propaganda for his position. And okay, that's fine. So he gets a big festival. And he goes on stage at the festival, and he's got 2,000 people in front of him. Biggest audience he's ever played. And he goes into his woke comedy. and people are cheering, and people are agreeing, and people are right with him. And he walks off to, huge applause. And he thinks, wow, I've not only made them laugh, I've influenced them. Then the next comic gets on. And the next comic basically is against everything the first guy says. And they're cheering him, and they're loving him, and they're laughing at him, and they give him a big ovation when he leaves. Because they forgot the first guy. As long as the comic is on stage, you're with him. If he's a good comic, you're agreeing with whatever he says. And then as soon as he's gone, it's off to the new shiny object. Contrast that with, say, music, where the music of the 60s actually truly influenced the politics of the era.
Joni Mitchell.
I point to 1,000 different acts, right? Bob Dylan. Think of so many acts. Neil Young. Think of all those political songs. Think of the songs that were basically fighting on definitely landing on one side of the generation gap.
Fighting the man.
Fighting the man. But comedy doesn't do that. Comedy doesn't do that for longer than a short period of time. And if it does, it generally does it with people who already agree. And if it doesn't, it seduces you briefly and then tosses you to the curb when the next person gets on. So I would love to think that comedy was that important, that it actually influenced political behavior. It doesn't really. I don't think it really does, not by much. I still read all the newspapers every day. I watch TV. I watch, CNN is like wallpaper in my house. If a first-run newspaper like the Globe and Mail or the Star printed lies, they would lose readership. So they have to make sure.
They also sometimes need to be rebutted and apologize for writing a false, story.
Right. If they get it wrong, they have a responsibility. But then there's a lot of fringe stuff. I've done interviews for fringe, left-wing fringe outlets and right-wing fringe outlets, and somehow they only took the stuff that appealed to them, and they left all the other stuff on the cutting room floor. They kept the stuff that sort of tried to confirm their own position.
This is the Newsload.